Good evening, you're watching Sunday Interview with me, your host, Gravazio Zulu. In 2 days' time, the nation will be commemorating the 8th anniversary of the death of Dr. Frederick Titus Chiluba, the former president of Zambia, who passed away on June 18, 2011. Dr. Chiluba led the movement for multi-party democracy in a spirited struggle to end the one-party rule under Dr. Kenneth Kaunda in 1991. He won the country's first multi-party elections after 1973 to become Zambia's second president since independence. But years after his death, Dr. Chiluba's legacy has remained a subject of debate. On the program today, we speak to Dr. Chiluba's childhood friend, Mr. Chapa Chikamba. Sir, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much indeed. Good evening.
Well,
and good evening, viewers.
I have introduced you as Dr. Chiluba's childhood friend, yes, close friend.
Yes.
I want you to explain to the viewer exactly how did you interact with Dr. Chiluba? How does your friendship, how far does your friendship go?
Our friendship goes far back when we were teenagers. Dr. Chiluba was a product of Kawambwa Secondary School, and I'm a product of the same school. At the same school, we had people became very prominent, like B.Y. Muila, Dr. Chiluba himself, and General Tembo in the MMD government. And so our relationship really starts from that far until he passed on. We would interact with him as friends, old friends, but when he became president, he became very, very busy. And it was rare to meet.
I wanted to look back and specifically focus maybe on the childhood period,
yes,
I mean, the teenage period when,
yes,
when you were at school. What kind of a person was Dr. Chiluba?
Well, Dr. Chiluba was still very, very active. He was a very good debater. He was a good footballer. He was humorous, and he was friendly, not only to the teachers at the secondary school, but to fellow students and the community around Kawambwa Secondary School. And in those days, even to the community of politicians who wanted independence to be achieved for Zambia. Yes.
Which years were these when you were at Kawambwa?
If you look at 59, 60 onwards, yes.
Dr. Chiluba's childhood was somehow challenged, and nationality somehow challenged later in his later years as president,
yes,
as coming from Congo and of course not being Zambian. Without really going back too much, yes, into the past.
Yes.
Did you have that feeling when you played with him?
No. Chiluba has never been a Congolese. Chiluba was born of Zambian parents, and even that challenge was a surprise to some of us who knew him. Yes, he was born in Kitwe, but he grew up as an orphan because the two parents passed on. And this is the challenge when you are an orphan that comes up when people begin to make allegations. You remember people talked about Chiluba not only coming from the Congo but Mozambique, and because he spoke Swahili, Tanzania, and you just cannot believe that one man can come from Mozambique, Tanzania, and Congo. How is it possible? How is it possible?
So when you look back to the days, yes, of Kawambwa boys, did anything ever strike you that this gentleman you were playing with would become president one day?
No, Chiluba was a leader in many ways, as I've told you, in debates, because Kawambwa Secondary School was a very, very active school in leadership. You could see that we have somebody who could be anything. And our teachers really ingrained in us that spirit of responsibility, that spirit of confidence that you can do it. When we went to Kawambwa Secondary School, for example, mathematics was a feared subject. But the teachers there instilled in us that mathematics is just an ordinary subject. You can make it, you can be a scientist, you can be anything. And they invited people like Dr. Nalumango when he visited, the headmaster. He could come and talk about how he became one of the first Zambian doctors. You had Kasita, who had just come from engineering, the first engineer, coming to talk to us. And you begin to see that you can also be an engineer. You don't have to remain at Kawambwa Secondary School as a pupil forever and ever. And indeed, many students there rose to positions of immense responsibility. General Tembo was commander of the Defense Forces, even before he became minister, if you remember. Mwira was a very successful businessman, one of the very successful few businessmen. Chiruba was a trade unionist of utmost.
And became president. Did you see a president when you saw Chiruba?
Yes, I saw a president.
Way back at Kawambwa. Did you ever, in your wildest thoughts,
no, because at that time
you would have a president coming from among yourselves?
At that time we were under colonial rule, and so aspiring to the presidency or to be governor was really, I would tell you, very unrealistic. Until we saw Kwame Nkrumah become president of Ghana. That's when we began to say, hey, even we here, Africans can be presidents. And that Ghanaian independence inspired more freedom fighters. You remember there were slogans like freedom now. But we had not seen African rule in Southern Africa at that time. 1960, of course, we saw Congo become independence. That's when it became even a realizable dream that if Kasavubu and Lumumba could be prime minister and president in the Congo, we could do it also in Zambia. And you know, Congo and Luapula are very close together. If a record is playing in Lubumbashi, which used to be Elizabeth, you would also find it in Mwansabombwe, in Mwataka Zambia area, and along the Luapula, because it's only the Luapula which divides us. Fast
forward, 1991, Dr. Chikamba becomes president.
Yes.
How easy was it for you to access him?
Well, it was not as easy as it used to be before he became president. When he was trade unionist.
Who located the friend? Did you locate him? Did he find you?
Well, since he was on the Copper Belt, when he used to come to Lusaka, we would meet, because I was also in MMD structures, and we would interact and talk about our friendship. But he was very busy crisscrossing the country, and we who were in the branches and at the local level could only meet with him a few times. But when he became president, you know, there is this aura of security and so forth. But when he came to Trinity, the church, he could wave at you, he could chat with you. I remember one day when his vehicle broke down, he went on the road and stopped a car to take him to State House. That's how simple the man was. Your vehicle breaks down, instead of waiting for security to organize transport, you wave somebody and he takes you to State House. That was Chiruba.
Were you disappointed that, despite you being very close to him, when he got into power, he never really appointed you into cabinet or any
no,
government position?
No, because he had to balance everything he did. If there is one president who tried to balance the ministerial positions, the foreign missions, it was President Chiluba. And so, personally, I didn't want to be in a position where I could, for example, put him under pressure that let me be this or let me be that. I was satisfied with what I was doing as a farmer, and I was satisfied as chairman of the Small Enterprise Development Board, and I was satisfied in various boards where I participated, like the National Food and Nutrition Commission and other boards. Now, and he couldn't really bring everyone we knew into cabinet. Otherwise, people would have been saying, how come only people from this area are in his cabinet? And so we congratulated him for that. And that's why when we went for celebrations, he could chat with him on Africa Freedom Day, Independence Day, and whenever there was these functions. But
now, it's 8 years since he died.
Yes.
And I must say, this is so far the biggest or most well-organized memorial event that has been held since he passed on. What is so special about the 8th year? I mean, all along you've not bothered to organize these things.
Yes. You know, after Chiluba left office, there was a lot of allegations about him. And when he passed on, the family was devastated. And very few of them would say, hey, old friends of Chiluba or those who worked with him, please let us organize a memorial for him. And so this year the family and a few friends said, let us try to look at the life of this distinguished son of Zambia, not only of Zambia, but Africa and the world. There are very few people with that kind of background who rise from a village to become president. And if you look back at Zambia, from 1962 to 91, the most prominent figure was His Excellency President Kaunda. And under one-party state, it was very difficult for young men like him to rise to prominence. Because there was political centralism in appointing.
You've lined up a lot of events coming forward. And one of them you had today, the lecture. What's the significance of these events that you're lining up?
Yes, we have lined up a lot of events. There are radio interviews on various radio stations, people talking about Chiluba's legacy from the trade union days up to the time we left the presidency and up to the time we died. There are TV interviews lined up in various TV stations, also talking about the same legacy of President Chiluba, Titus Chiluba. And there are newspaper articles being written about his period. Some are talking about the structural adjustment and how it affected people, the high indebtedness in Zambia, and how EPIC came about from 1996. If you look at structural adjustment program, it started immediately he ascended to the presidency. The structural adjustment program had a lot of side effects on people. Yes, he liberalized the economy, shortages ended, but at a high cost.
And before you get to there, I want you to briefly outline, legacy is a big word. And it's one word. What would you, in your thoughts, describe Chiluba's legacy as? Underlining a few lines. What would people remember him?
Remember him
about?
People should remember him for housing empowerment, for liberalizing the transport sector. He used to say, the buses and minibuses, before the end of my 2 terms, will be waiting for passengers and not the other way around. We were queuing up to be on a minibus and on long journey buses. But after he liberalized the economy and there were so many buses, even today, if you go to any station, the bus drivers are the ones looking for passengers. Not only that, the shortages which were there in the shops, now is the question of having money in your pocket. You don't have to queue up for sugar, you don't have to queue up for bread, and for all these essential commodities, including clothing. Now you have shopping malls all over. I know they have their own problems, but people are able to see that the goods they were queuing up are available. The mines you privatize, now the government doesn't have to remove funds from the treasury to run them. They are being run by the private sector. And so many factors. Look at education, for example. There are so many universities now. Students don't have to apply only to the University of Zambia, but there are so many other universities, private universities and so forth. It's a question of working hard, if you're a parent, to make funds available for your child to have the necessary education.
So clearly, in the underlying factors could be liberalization,
yes,
democracy, of course, and maybe freedom of speech.
Yes.
Democracy, maybe we focus on one of the issues, the economy.
Yes.
This was one of his bigger legacy issues.
Yes. Yes.
He inherited a troubled economy, and he had to make very bold decisions,
yes,
like liberalizing the economy. But this, like you say, was at a very high cost.
It was at a very high
People lost jobs.
Yes.
They were retrenched.
Yes.
And some of them not paid.
Yes.
And some of them died during that period.
Yes.
Did you sit back and think it was too much?
No, it wasn't too much, because if you look at the economy, the way it was structured before Chiluba came in, it was literally no economy to talk about. Take, for example, if you have 40 buses and you have got 4,000 drivers, what amount of money are you going to generate to pay these 4,000 drivers? That was the situation at the time we came in. Sugar, which we were manufacturing, couldn't be found. There were so many things which had gone wrong. Yes, we can say people lost jobs, but most of those jobs were not real jobs. You woke up, you went for work. At my place, for example, where I worked, there were 2 vehicles, but 20 drivers. That kind of situation is not normal in an economy.
But when all this was happening, did you feel your friend was losing popularity? The masses were now going to really think this was going to get too much?
No,
could get worse before it got any better.
Yes, because Chiluba was a determined man. He asked people.
Determined or stubborn?
Not really stubborn, but determined. Because a stubborn man doesn't listen. Chiluba used to listen. Take, for example, the agricultural policy. MMD began liberalizing the agricultural policy. But remember, there was problems in the agricultural sector when it was being liberalized. And he had to backtrack a bit. IMF and the World Bank wanted him to immediately privatized ZESCO, Zambia National Commercial Bank, Zambia Railways, and so forth and so forth. He delayed because he listened to the people. The water utilities, IMF and the World Bank wanted them privatized, but Chiluba delayed those. The mines, he had to wait a long time before they could be privatized.
Now, the privatization aspect of it is in some circles is criticized as being wholesome and not well thought out, and leading to the total collapse of the manufacturing sector. And in some instances, there was total negligence and asset stripping.
When you look back, the Privatization Act, and you look at it very critically, was well done. But like in any human endeavor, there are always rotten eggs who will do the opposite of what the president intends to do. Yes, there were certain things which went wrong, but most of the things were positive. And now when you look back, Zambians really own stake in the economy. Although one would like to see even more improvement. Mistakes were made, just like in any human organization, even here where we are. With all the good intentions of the Zambia National Broadcasting Act, there are certain things which need refining. And hence, when people have come up with a colossal program like the MMD did, one needed a monitoring mechanism so as to adjust the program as we are going along. And if you look back, MMD introduced a few adjustments to the privatization program. And that's why institutions like ZESCO, National Commercial Bank, and other utilities were not nationalized because people were talking.
Do you think the privatization should have been phased? Privatize a few companies.
Yes.
Wait to see the outcome, unlike how it was done, where a huge number of companies were privatized at the go.
But you remember this privatization issue came up even during the UNIP period. International organizations like IMF, World Bank had advised the UNIP government to do that kind of privatization, slow privatization, slowly. But nothing was done from the 1970s, 80s, until the economy totally collapsed. Chiluba inherited a bankrupt economy. There was nothing in the treasury when MMD came.
Another accusation is that part of his team probably looted the assets and benefited from it.
Well, I don't know about that because, you know, it was during Chiluba's time that the Drug Enforcement Commission was established. The Anti-Corruption Act was reviewed. The Human Rights Commission was enhanced. And so many institutions were established to monitor who was being corrupt and who was not being corrupt. Obviously, if there was all that looting, the system would have caught up with them.
Were these institutions strong enough?
Yes, they were strong enough because Chiluba didn't interfere in the appointment of these institutions. And if you remember, you look back, that's when Parliament had to approve the appointment of these major institutions. If you were Director General of the Anti-Corruption Commission, before you were appointed, Parliament had to scrutinize you. If you were a Chief Justice being appointed, Parliament had to scrutinize you. And it was only after the approval of Parliament that the appointment was effected. And also remember, it was during Chiluba's time that the Presidential Emolument Act was passed. And it was done in retrospect in case of Dr. Kaunda, so that he could benefit from it. But before that, there was nothing like that.
I'll touch on those issues as we progress. Now I need to assess the impact of the decision to liberalize and privatize the economy.
Yes. The impact was things became available. Of course, interest rates also went up, but now they have come down. The exchange rate went up, but there was more money. You didn't have to apply to FEMAC to have foreign exchange to go and buy a vehicle from Botswana. A Zambian now is in a position to even import a vehicle directly from Japan. That was unheard of. The motor vehicles you are seeing clogging our roads is because of that liberalization. At the Broadcasting Corporation here, you had very few men who owned their own vehicles. Most of us really came to work here on foot or on minibuses. But now, Grevasio, you go to the hospital, the nurses have got their own transport. The doctors have also got their own transport. That's the beauty of democratization. That's the beauty of liberalizing the economy. More people have benefited. Houses, you find a 25-year-old man owns a house. They are saving. In our days, you had to get permission because of the leadership code to build a house, to own a farm. And that was not the fair way.
You would say there was less corruption then?
No. Corruption, my dear Grevasio, exists in conditions of shortages. When you had no sugar and you had extra money, you corrupted the manager in the shop so that you remove yourself from the queue. But when things are available, how do you begin corrupting people? Because these
How do you explain that we seemingly had a higher cases of corruption after post-UNIP era than before?
No. The UNIP era, you see, you didn't report the truth about the situation as it existed.
Is that a correct statement?
That's a correct statement, because if you go today to Zimbabwe, where there are shortages everywhere, corruption is more rampant than when things are available. And that, what I'm talking about, applies all over the world. In conditions
so your
of
statement
shortages.
is based on an assumption that
Because
there were shortages then, then there certainly could have been a bit of corruption.
No, not assumptions, because now there is social media. Social media reports on what is going on, whether you like it or not. There are so many radio stations, there are so many newspapers, liberalized, reporting on what is going on. At that time, the press was controlled. If the government didn't want you to talk about a corrupt minister, you, Grevasio, here, wouldn't dare do that, or else you are dismissed. Now, if you don't talk about it, another radio station will do that. And that's the beauty about democratization. It makes people free. And hence the freedom of speech. Although we are overdoing it by making so many allegations which cannot be proved. And that's why when you look at President Lungu, he's telling us as citizens of Zambia that let us not go the way of alleging corruption in other people and trying them before investigation. That's not the rule of law. The rule of law requires us to investigate allegations. And when we have the evidence, then we take them to court. And if the court proves them guilty, then they go to jail for reformation. But now there are so many wild allegations which cannot be proved. If, for example, I myself decide not to be in the bar every night and I build a beautiful home, have you seen anybody coming to investigate me or coming to investigate you? Because it's a liberalized environment. If I want to drown myself in beer, I will not have the funds to build and to look after my own.
Let's look at the political aspect of Dr. Chikamba. He came up as a champion of democracy. And of course, a defender of workers' rights. That's where he came from. But as he assumed the presidency, eventually people began to feel that he did not respect the democracy that he preached himself.
Well, I don't know about that, but he tried by all means. Take, for example, the MMD itself. They had a convention before going into elections. Everybody was allowed to stand at their convention and he emerged the winner. The second convention, he allowed even his former president, Dr. Mwanawasa, to stand against him. And many positions were contested by various people. Central Committee was no longer nominated. And the Central Committee of any political party really controls what goes on. If you are elected and not appointed, you are able to argue your case properly because you have a mandate from the electorate. It was the same in Parliament. People from various parties were allowed to contest elections. And that has gone on up to now.
So you would define that as his legacy. But again, it probably got a dent when he himself wanted to amend the constitution and go for a third term.
Yes. That was unfortunate.
Did he consult you?
That was unfortunate. And because he consulted friends like me and the other people, we told him, this is not on. And you remember, he came around and said he was no longer going to stand for the third term. But remember, the same people who condemned Chiluba were the ones really telling him to go for the third term. And within the region itself, there were presidents who went for the third term. Namibian president, for example, went for the third term. And the other countries.
So he was trying to emulate them.
He was trying to emulate them.
He was going to go back on his word. Had the civil society not protested heavily?
No. He went, he didn't want to go on his word just because of the civil society. He himself was against it. But there were people within the ruling party itself who were tricksters, who wanted to really ruin MMD so that they could ascend to the presidency. And those pressure groups were there, and they'll always be there in any political party. Because if you are the beneficiaries of what is going on, you try by all means to go for the status quo. But unfortunately for those people, Chiluba stuck to his guns. When he went to the United Nations General Assembly in that year, September, he said goodbye to his fellow presidents. And the people applauded in New York that he is setting a very good example. He, even before going to the United Nations in New York, he had a press conference where he said he was not going for the third term, irrespective of the kind of support he had in MMD. And he didn't. But unfortunately, that in itself, to many in the country, dented to a certain extent that thing.
Do you think it should be held against him?
No, it shouldn't be, because he came out clean.
Did he become dictatorial towards the end? I mean, even expelling his colleagues from the party?
No.
People like the Christian Temples and the others.
Yes, that not allowing democracy, for example, by telling his friends that they couldn't stand for the presidency because they came from the same area as he did. Maybe you could say that was undemocratic, because the beginning of MMD, for example, allowed everyone to stand, whether you came from the same area like Chirubak did, or you came from another area, because that was the beauty of democracy. But you know, in politics in Zambia, it's always better to balance, because it's one Zambia, one nation. You want to allow as many people from various walks of life to take part in the administration and the ruling of the country. He was trying to be advisory. He was not trying to make it compulsory.
That was one of his most critical times.
Yes.
You were talking to him. What were you saying?
What was he saying?
What was he saying? What were you saying to him?
We were saying to him, Mr. President, we began very well, and let us end this work as well as we began it. Allow people from all walks of life, from each and every province, to take part in the political process. And you remember, it was during his rule that so many other political parties were formed. The Chakombokas of those days, the Chakas, and all sorts of parties were formed. That was liberalization in the political thinking of this country. And credit should go to him. And even now, if you look at it, we have so many other political parties, so many contending factors, and so many opinions, so many newspapers, including the mass media. And he even brought in the cell telephone, which is available to each and every Zambian, even at the village level. Now you can communicate. And now there is even, what is the solar panels charging those telephones in the villages. That's liberalization, and that's positive in my view.
Now, let's look at the issue of he left office, and probably that's when now his image should have stood out, his legacy should have stood out, but he was prosecuted on charges of corruption.
Well, remember, those charges of corruption were taken to Parliament, and people declared that 169 charges were prima facie cases. 169 cases were supposed to be before a court of law. And in a democracy where there is rule of law, the director of public prosecutions was supposed to take those 169 cases through courts. But remember, for 6, 7, 8 years, the only cases which went for trial were 6.
That was after investigations. I mean, you wouldn't really fault Parliament, because Parliament is not an investigative wing.
No, Parliament itself has the power to be democratic by allowing, when the allegations have been made, the one who is alleged to stand before one of the committees so that he could defend himself.
Well, they didn't want to do that because they just lifted the immunity to allow him to defend himself in court. Do you think he acquitted himself well?
He acquitted himself well, because if he didn't acquit himself well, he would have been sentenced and he would have been in jail. And you remember,
this was the biggest impact
yeah,
on his legacy, the biggest dent.
yes.
Will it ever be cleaned?
Zambian people have always been just. And I'm sure when they look back, they will, over the years, even now, see that there was injustice done to a man who was totally innocent.
But he was acquitted.
He was acquitted. And when you are acquitted in any given court of law, where there is rule of law, your immunity should be restored. Remember when...
Is that what you're advocating for now?
One can advocate for that, because justice has got to be seen to be done. When you are acquitted, there must be restoration.
And there would be no need now, because he's gone. So he cannot be, of course, he cannot be prosecuted posthumously. So even if you restored his immunity, then it would not make much sense.
No, his immunity given to him posthumously would be greatly appreciated. Not only by him, but by his family. Remember, Chiluba had many children, grandchildren, relatives, and friends who would like to see justice done. And that's the way life should go. So many crimes are committed, but justice sometimes comes later.
What would you call justice? An acquittal is not justice enough?
Acquittal is justice, but the damage to your reputation, to your legacy, if it continues unabated, is injustice, in my view. They say justice delayed is justice denied.
Maybe you should look at it from this point of view. Of course, Chiluba wasn't a saint. Dr. Chiluba wasn't a saint. He made mistakes.
Yes.
So in viewing the legacy, probably, would you think his mistakes outweighed his performance?
No, his performance outweighed his mistakes. Look at what we have been talking about. People have been empowered in many ways. Economically, housing, transport, education, health. You look at any sector which had collapsed and somebody comes to build. Would you say that's a mistake? In this world, if you see it like a vegetable, like a pumpkin, you are doing nothing, you are stationary in one place, you will not make mistakes. But if you are active, my dear brother, if you are active and you are doing something, there will definitely be a mistake, one or two made. If I sat at my residential area, never moved an inch, and nobody saw me, what mistake would the people say I've made?
You are his friend, I know. And,
yes,
and for now, maybe I would say we are seeing a bit of restoration.
Yes.
A university has been named after him. A great thing, you would say?
Chiluba was a nationalist. When he fought for trade union workers' rights, was he fighting for those workers' rights in Luapula? He was fighting for workers' rights throughout the country. When he fought...
So why hasn't the labor movement recognized him?
Well, the labor movement, just like the population of Zambia, was thoroughly intimidated.
Is it because he abandoned them during his reign?
No, he never abandoned them. If he had abandoned them, Zambians would still be queuing up for buses.
In terms of workers' rights?
Workers' rights, Chiluba even consolidated them more. He still stood for workers' rights, but he had an objective to build Zambia. If those companies, my dear brother, all of them had collapsed, where was employment going to be found? Because they were going to collapse.
Let's look at lessons. And I mean, we're probably coming to the end of the interview.
Yes.
What are the biggest lessons to be learned from this man? He ruled Zambia for 10 years, came from literally nothing to become a fierce leader of the labor movement, and eventually president of the country.
Yes.
What lessons should people learn from Dr. Chilumba?
People should learn that irrespective of where you come from, the moment you apply your mind to what you are doing, you can rise up to any position in the world. That's lesson number one. Lesson number two is be focused in whatever you are doing. Be confident, be determined in order to succeed in this world. Those factors, my brother Grevasio, is what made Chilumba to be what he was. Rising from nothingness to the presidency of this country, to international acclaim, he was one of the greatest orators of the world. When Chilumba spoke, whether it was in Zambia, whether he spoke in Nyanja or Bemba, people listened. He had a very small stature, if you remember. But people respected him as their president. When he spoke at international fora, irrespective of what height you were, you heard what he had to say. Because what is in the brain, my brother, is more important than what is in your physical structure. And that's what Chilumba really represented.
The Christian life?
His Christian life, he declared Zambia as a Christian nation. He tried to live by those virtues and values. But like all of us human beings, we are never perfect. But he tried his level best. I myself am not perfect. By the moment I'll be perfect when I die, I can sing to the glory of God. But despite all our faults and all our sins, the good Lord has forgiven us.
You congregated with him
at Trinity. And he was a lay preacher.
Stories you have to tell about that?
Well, he was a very good lay preacher. In my view, he was a very good Christian. Yes, each one of us have got our own faults. But when he congregated with us, the children from Sunday schools loved him because he was a loving man. He would touch them, encourage them to rise up and move on. And when you fall, he used to say, it's always better. You don't fall flat on your face. You rise up and continue the journey. And that's what he did from childhood days up to the end of his life. Even when he went under prosecution in courts, you never saw Chilumba hold a press conference to insult those who were prosecuting him. He was a unique fellow in that regard. He respected the law and abided by his principles. Even under the greatest stress, Chilumba tried by all means to be respectful to each and every individual. When he was being insulted all over the country because of the structural adjustment program, he would just laugh and say, hey, mwana wesu, kumbali kutukwe mfumu. Meaning, even the chief is insulted by those who are outside, who don't know the battles that chief is undergoing to bring the benefits to the people of Zambia. he had to undergo so much suffering, spend sleepless nights to build the economy of Zambia. And now Zambia can even borrow. At the time we came into power, nobody was able from Zambia to borrow any money for development. There was no investment coming to Zambia because we had nationalized the assets of the Western powers.
We believe he ran his race and ran it so well?
Chiluba ran the race, and it could be said that he ran the race so well. And it could also be said, if God is on our side, who can be against us?
Mzee Chikamba, it's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you.
That's all we have for you this evening. You've been watching Sunday Interview, and our guest this evening was Dr. Frederick Chiluba's friend, Mr. Chapa Chikamba, who is also chairperson for the Frederick Chiluba Memorial Committee. We'll be back next week, same time. Pleasant viewing.